One of the most remembered of our volunteers in this area is Dorothy Connor. Dorothy and her mother and brother came out here in about 1912. Yeah, 1912. They lived in a home that still stands on the hills just north of Jacksonville. In late 1915, April of course, Dorothy applied for a passport that would take her to England. Now, her sister was over there. She had married a British nobleman, and they were setting up a hospital in France, and they wanted her to come over and be a nurse. Dorothy and her brother-in-law, Dr. Howard Fisher, left on the British ocean liner Lusitania in May of 1915. I was pro-British for several reasons, Fisher said. First, I'd lived among the English people in British India for 6 years, and I learned to appreciate their worth. I also had lived 9 months with the Germans in Berlin, and I despised those Germans. And finally, the rape of Belgium was a crime against humanity that could not be forgiven. Now, when Dorothy and Fisher arrived in New York, they learned that the German government had issued a warning. Notice, travelers intending to embark on the Atlantic voyage, you're reminded that a state of war exists, that the zone of war includes the waters adjacent to the British Isles, that in accordance with formal notice given by the Imperial German government, vessels flying the flag of Great Britain or any of her allies are subject and liable to destruction in those waters, and the travelers sailing in the war zone on ships of Great Britain or her allies do so at their own risk. And yet they got on board. While waiting to sail, Dorothy wrote home. The Lusitania is now being held up, and there's a report that the captain has lost his nerve. But I think we'll get off all right. Well, the crossing had been calm, and Dorothy was bored. It's been such a dull and dreary, stupid trip. I can't help hoping that we'll get some kind of thrill going up the channel. I couldn't have taken a more uneventful and stupid voyage in my life. After nearly a week of sailing, Friday, May 6th, opened with a ship approaching the Irish coast. Now, this was a favorite hunting ground for German submarines, U-boats. By noon, Lusitania was running a zigzag course, attempting to spoil any possible attack. And just after 2 that afternoon, the torpedoes struck. Dorothy and Fisher were at lunch. Dorothy and I just finished eating our squab, Fisher said, when bang came a dull sound like a soft blast of a very slight shock, and in a few seconds, a listing of the ship. Dorothy said, "What is that?" And I said, "That, my dear, is what we came after, a torpedo. We must go up on deck." Well, Dorothy and Fisher merged with the others, struggling in a frenzied dash up 3 flights to the boat deck. Within 10 feet from where we stood, Fisher said, some people were trying to lower a boat. Men were jumping on women and children, trying to get onto it. I would not let Dorothy try it, and she did not wish to. And it was fortunate, for there was no one who knew how to handle that boat. It fell into the sea, upside down, spilling and hurtling as it fell on top of those struggling in the water. When I saw the boats were of no use, I rushed below to get us life belts. Now, his cabin deck was already flooded, the electricity was gone, passageways were dark. He finally located 2 life belts and returned to Dorothy. Green seawater was already at our feet, Dorothy said. A ship's officer shouted, "The ship's not sinking! There's no danger! Don't worry!" And with that word, the ship turned over and sank. We jumped just before the high side was submerged, and we were sucked down and down and down. I thought perhaps we would come up again, but in the melee of things whirling around in the water, I was caught by the ropes, the bars, and other things that held me fast. I made up my mind I was going to die and drowned, and I resigned myself to my fate. Now, Dr. Fisher was also underwater, struggling and nearly drowning. I told myself, if you could only hold your breath long enough, you might make it. I went down and twisted around like a bug in a whirlpool, always wondering if I could last it out. I slid across the rope, pushed myself free, then started upward as rapidly as I had gone down. Dorothy, as we said, was ready to die. She'd lost her consciousness. When she came to, all she could ever remember was some voice that said, "Well, where am I going to put you, little lady?" Imagine my surprise, she said, to come to hours later and in my very dim consciousness discover that I was lying on an upturned raft. Well, the rest of the afternoon was just a series of being hauled from one boat to another until we finally got onto a boat that brought us to the hotel in Queenstown, Ireland. The next morning, Dorothy was relieved to find out that Dr. Fisher was in the same hotel that he had also survived. And undaunted by their near-death struggles, and as if nothing had happened, Fisher and Dorothy vowed to continue their mission and help Dorothy's sister and brother-in-law and her brother-in-law set up that hospital in Paris, which they did. Now, they did, at the end of that year, return home to the United States. But after the U.S. entered the war in 1917, Dorothy again braved the submarines, the ocean, and the war, and went back to help her sister establish a canteen and a rest area for French soldiers just 6 miles from the German front. Now, even with all the difficulties and dangers of being so close to that front, and even with those, well, we can call them humorous moments when she realized that those French soldiers were looking at her and talking in a language she did not quite understand, she was still quite happy. "The work is most interesting," she said, "and I already feel very much at home." Well, thoughts of home ended quite violently on May 27th of 1918. That's when German forces tried to make their last push. They began an attack that quickly began to storm over eastern France. The canteen personnel were evacuated, and Dorothy returned to that Paris hospital. There she remained until 1919, when she finally returned to her Southern Oregon home. Hey, thanks so much for watching. I try to post a new video at least every week, so we're looking forward to seeing you again. You might like the video that you see down there on the left, too. And don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Hope to see you next time. Thanks again. Have a great day.